Hello, friends, and welcome back again to another episode of Conservation Stories. I'm your host, Tillery Timmons-Sims. Conservation Stories is a podcast brought to you by the Sand Hill Area Research Association. And we here at SARA are always focused on what can we do to help our neighbors, and who are people that we see that are bringing help to people in agriculture and people in rural America. And we are super excited to bring a guest to you today that we've been watching for a while and have just been able to meet, and that is Alan Williams with Understanding Ag. Alan, thank you so much for joining.
It's an absolute pleasure. Glad to be here.
I just really appreciate you taking out the time from your day and joining us. And Lacey and I met you about 3 weeks ago or so in Chicago at a sustainable farming meeting. And there were a few of us lone ag people there and connected. And Lacey is also going to be working through the process of going through the Regenified certification. So I'm excited for us to talk about that over the course of probably the summer.
You bet. Yeah.
That'll be great. So we have a mix here, audience of urban and rural people and people that have been farming for a long time. And so can you give us a little background on yourself? And are you new to agriculture? Are you not new to agriculture? And what your experience is, and then maybe how you got into this new thing that we call regenerative ag.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I am a lifelong farmer and rancher. I was born on my family's farm in South Carolina, and I was the sixth generation. They've been there since 1840. So I have had, again, a lifelong background in agriculture. I ended up going to graduate school quite unintentionally. I was talked into it and getting a PhD, and then again ending up for about 15 years in academia doing research and teaching and that type of thing. And it was during that time period that I actually became very entrenched in the conventional way of doing things. Research was oriented that way, pretty much everything I was doing. But it was also during the course of that time period that I began to see the disparities and the contradictions. I began to notice gradually that in spite of all the research we were doing and new products and new technologies that were being developed through research, our soils were not getting better. They were getting worse, and we were more and more degraded, and we were more and more reliant on external inputs. And the same thing with our livestock. Our livestock really weren't getting better. They were becoming more reliant on supplementation, on pharmaceuticals, all of those types of things. And that's when I had to really begin to ask myself the hard questions, because I'm at a land-grant university. I'm supposed to be doing things that are truly helping to move agriculture forward, right?
Yes.
And yet, by all means of measure within the university, I was doing well. I was tenured, promoted. I brought in grant dollars. I had lots of peer-reviewed publications. So by all marks of success, I was doing well. But I wasn't. I wasn't really helping the true stakeholders, the farmers and ranchers. Right. And I had to think back on, okay, how did my family for 6 generations make it, not just make it, but thrive, and for those generations support multiple families on the farm. And yet they didn't have all of these supplements and pharmaceuticals and fertilizers and chemicals and everything else that we now we're believing that we must have to be a success. And that was the beginning of my next journey in life, and that's the regenerative journey. So after 15 years in academia, I had a decision to make. Now I'm tenured, I'm promoted, I'm fully vested, and I can either stay and do another 15 years, do my 30 and retire, or I can leave. It's a very hard decision, but I decided to resign and to leave. That was in the year 2000. Went back into farming and ranching, but doing it very differently, searching, a lot of trial and error, to develop what we're doing today. And then all of that gradually led to me meeting, my now partner, Gabe Brown, and us deciding to form Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy and Regenified as our new companies. And through those efforts, we have now been able to work with farmers and ranchers and growers in all 50 U.S. states and 50 plus other countries around the world, and, multiple continents. And in the U.S., we're working across a little better than 37 million acres. It's just been this seismic shift in my life, but it has been the very best thing I could have ever done. I would have never imagined 25 years ago when I left the university that we would be doing what we're doing today. And even more important, that we will be able to make the impact that we're making today. So I'm just so grateful for all of that.
All of our journeys are kind of winding roads. And I feel like sometimes the windier, the more impactful.
Exactly.
The more trouble they are. The little more difficult they are, but they are more impactful for sure. So
yes.
Gabe is up in one of the Dakotas, isn't that right?
North Dakota, near Bismarck.
Yeah. So he is quite a ways from you. How did you connect with him?
We were, and that's a very good question. We obviously, for a long time, we had no clue who each other were, but we both were being asked to go on the speaking circuit. And so we met each other through that, speaking at conferences and workshops and things like that. And then we both ended up serving on the board together of a conference called the Grass-Fed Exchange. And so just after several years of getting to know each other and we both would hear, I remember the first time I heard his story, and he probably remembers the first time he heard mine. And, I know that I thought immediately, whoa, wait a minute. He's doing a lot of the same things that I'm doing, and they're working, but yet he's way up here in North Dakota and I'm way down in Mississippi. How can this be? That this is working in two very different climates and environments. And that is one of the things that struck us and that we started talking about. And over time, we just came to the realization that, hey, we need to do this together. And that was the genesis of Understanding Ag.
So obviously, before you met Gabe, there were people that were coming to you. They were saying, how did the word get out that you were doing something weird that was working?
Well,
because that's what people were saying. I mean, I'm just
oh yeah. Well, all of my former colleagues at the university thought I was absolutely crazy, and that I was absolutely destined to fail. Yeah, so that there was no doubt about that. They were even betting on my failure. And many other neighbors, and others were, just laughing and thinking, what in the heck is he doing? But around that same time, I became very heavily involved in the very new and emerging grass-fed sector. And I developed one of the very first set of protocols and standards that are still in use today by many who are doing it. And somehow, some way, I became, quote, the expert and the person that people called on. And that was one of the principal things they were asking me initially to speak on, was grass-fed beef production and those types of things. And then it just sort of burgeoned into, like I said, everything else that we do today.
How many years after you started farming? 5, 10 years? How many years did you really have to put in doing all this stuff before you really started to see the impact on your bottom line and on your soil?
Yeah, the honest truth is I really did start seeing an impact in year one, even though, quite honestly, I was flying by the seat of my pants.
Wow.
The principal thing I was doing was, and at that point in time, I was on the farm every day, right?
Yes, yeah.
Which I'm not today because I'm traveling all over the place.
Right.
But at that point in time, I was on the farm literally every day. And the one thing that I was making absolutely sure I was doing was observing, constantly observing impact of every decision of every day. Mm-hmm. And because I was moving the livestock every single day, that allowed me to be able to make those key observations. And so I just kept learning and learning. And every time I would make a mistake, and believe you me, I made many, but every time I made a mistake, because I was there every day and observing every day, I would catch that mistake early on. I would literally run myself through a series of questions. Okay, why? Why did that happen? What did you do? What caused it? And sort of forcing myself to come to a conclusion. Mm-hmm. And then I would do it differently the next day. So I had, again, literally all of these days and months and years strung together of making these small mistakes, but correcting them and doing it differently. And I really didn't have a mentor at that time.
I was going to ask if you were just shooting in the dark. So what made you even have the thought about moving your cattle around like that? Well, like, where did that even originate in your mind?
And remember at that time, so that was back in the year 2000 and even a little bit before then in the late 90s. And, we didn't have all the YouTube and, social media and all the stuff we have today. So you read a lot more.
That was a thing.
Imagine that. And so I'd actually read, 2 or 3 articles, I think, in Stockman Grass Farmer and a few other places, about some of this. And back then, it wasn't called adaptive grazing like we call it today. And there were various names. Mob grazing was one of the terms that was being used. Yep. And so I was reading about this mob grazing and people moving their cows every day and moving them under, higher stock densities and these types of things. And I just said, well, you know what, that may be just crazy enough to work. And so again, I just started experimenting. It was about 5 years before I started being asked to go on the speaking circuit. So I was doing this for about 5 years after I'd left the university, tweaking and refining. And that is what led to the development of what we now call the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, was those years of my observing, tweaking, refining, all of this. And so that's what led me to understand that there are compounding effects. So that is where the rule of compounding came from, that diversity matters. So hence the rule of diversity, and that we can't make it prescriptive. We have to keep changing things up all the time. And that's what led to the rule of disruption. And I used to be an athlete and I still work out, but I've learned, from many years of working out and the years of being an athlete, that if you're going to progress as an athlete, you have to intentionally and routinely introduce planned, purposeful disruptions into your exercise routine, right? And I kept thinking to myself, well, if that works for me and for anybody, then why does that not also work out on the land? Because that's biology too. We're biology, that's biology. We're dealing with biology. And lo and behold, it does work. And so all of that just, and again, there was no one big aha moment and everything all of a sudden became clear.
Right.
But over time, just all these gradual realizations that allowed me to be able to, finally develop, like I said, what we call the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship that we use today.
Out here on the Texas plains, water is everything, and there's a resource that's as vital as it is fragile: our playa lakes. These lakes are nature's reservoir, catching rainwater to recharge our aquifer and provide lifelines for wildlife. But now they need our help. In collaboration with the Texas Ply Lakes Conservation Initiative and the Cargill Global Water Challenge, Sarah has started the Our Legacy is Tomorrow's Water initiative to inspire and work with landowners to restore and protect our Ply Lakes. Each playa we save helps secure a sustainable water future for the generations that will be coming after us. Whether it's improving soil health, restoring habitats, or recharging groundwater, we are committed to making a difference. Together, we can build a legacy that we can all be proud of. To learn how you can join in, visit the Ply Lakes Restoration Initiative page on the Sarah website. Let's keep Texas water flowing strong for the future. Visit sarah-conservation.com. And I love that stewardship is a big word around here, because we have a friend that says sustainability, nobody knows what the hell that is. He says stewardship is a verb and it makes you responsible. Now, if you're a grammar Nazi, you're going to be saying right now, stewardship is not a verb.
There you go.
But according to my friend Mike Hightower, it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I absolutely abhor the use of the term sustainability in agriculture, because that's impossible. It's literally impossible. You cannot sustain the land. You can't sustain all the living life that is around us on a farm. Just no more than we can sustain ourselves. Every one of us, every day more we live, we get a day older, and we can't stop that. We don't choose to stop aging at 30 and say, okay, for the rest of my life, I'm 30 years old, and I'm not going to change. Well, that's what sustaining is. And we can't do that. And neither can anything on your land, on your farm, in your animals, and your crops. So that term is not correct. It has to be a better term, and so the term regenerative, we can regenerate land. We can reinvigorate it, and all of that. And I was just over in Iceland, and I spoke at their very first ever regenerative ag conference, and then spent a number of days after that touring a lot of the farms over there. And they explained to me, because I asked, I said, what does regenerative agriculture in English, how does that translate in Icelandic? And they said, it's not a direct translation. They said, in Icelandic, here's what it means to us: enriching the land.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's perfect.
It's beyond what I feel like, we've looked at in general of more of an extraction, where we are looking at what do we need to do in order to extract what we need from the land.
Yep.
And it's kind of like what you're talking about is kind of turning that, upside down on its head, because you need something from the land, but we are saying we're going to give to the land what it needs in order for it to provide for us.
Right.
There's a lot of people that are listening that may not know like some of the basics, and then there's some farmers that are listening that have maybe heard the word regenerative as many times as they've heard the word sustainability, and I always get frustrated when words get co-opted and overused, but really there's not a better word than regenerating,
right.
Because it may be at some point when you have reached a space or, a point of improvement in your soil where you're like, okay, this is really healthy. And then maybe you're going, okay, now what do I do to keep doing this, or to, keep improving, or to, you know what I'm saying? It's like you have these efficiencies. You get to like, the closer you get to 100% efficiency, the gains are really hard. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you kind of get, and that's one of the things I've seen about certifications is it's like, well, tell us what you're going to do next. And, the way that what you're talking about is really such a fluid decision-making process that you're really having to And you really got to slow down and be really in touch and tuned with what's going on with your soil and your land.
Yeah, you do.
That's a completely different way of managing things. Here this is just my own personal opinion, which I have zero issues with the science behind genetic modification. However, it did create a cultural change for us. Part of that was, how we managed, because it became more efficient, and so efficiency is good, but it also has its own ripple effects, and some of those are not good. And then we've had the struggle of, volatilization of chemicals and all the things that have come along with that have caused even more deeper rifts within our culture. And it just seems like when our GMOs came in here, like you can just, for me anyway, that was the last generation that it looked like the generation before. Does that make sense? Like our lifestyle was similar to my grandma. Like I grew up canning and growing a garden. My grandmother had, canning and grew a garden. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's like, I'm certain that there's more to it than just one single variety of cotton. It's a whole cultural shift, but it really does seem like that really brought on the difference, and you just weren't out. You didn't have to be out every day.
Right. There was very much a cultural shift, and I've lived long enough to have seen that as well. I was born in 1960, and when I was growing up on the family farm, we were much more diverse than the majority of farms today. We had multiple types of livestock. We grew multiple types of crops, planted a very large garden every year. We had peaches, apples, pears, on and on and on. And yes, I remember, my mother, my grandmother did tons of canning. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of everything that we ate every day was produced on the farm. Mm-hmm. So I had this incredible food experience growing up. Yes. And you're exactly right. That type of life, less than 1% of the way less than 1% of the American population lives that kind of life anymore. And so the vast majority of people today in the U.S. are so removed from how our food is really grown and raised and produced, and what it takes to do that and what it means to do that. It has left this huge gap and void in understanding.
In fact, we just recorded earlier today a podcast on Cotton Trust Protocol, and we were just talking about that. Not only is the consumer far removed from the farm, we are far removed from the consumer. And so we were talking about why these certifications and this kind of thing, and the frustration, that I think I know farmers feel. Lacey, mentioned this at that meeting we were at about being the commodity that gets farmed. And, I just think that the part of it is like, we need to know what our customer wants. And on the cotton side, they do want to know, where is it, the people that have the privilege and the time to think about those things want to know that what they're wearing, where it's coming from. And we know enough now that we know that what we wear even can, impact our health.
Yes. That's the other thing that we have discovered. We've been working a lot with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet and doing metabolomic analysis on many different, food products that are being produced, and doing comparison and contrast between, the commodity version and the regeneratively produced version.
Yeah.
And we're finding radical differences in that phytonutrient profile and the fatty acid profiles and all of that. And it's pretty predictable, pretty dependable. If you build the soil and build the biology in the soil and build diversity, you're building phytonutrient richness into those foods. But the other thing that it's doing, if we talk about things like cotton crops that are producing fiber for us, it will make, first of all, the cotton itself, as it's growing, stronger, more resilient. it'll reduce reliance on synthetics and chemicals and everything else while that cotton is growing. And secondly, it'll add, additional strength and quality to the cotton, to the end product. So this phytonutrient richness works in all of those ways. It's not just to create a more nutrient dense food for us. Yes, it is that. But for any other plants that we're growing, whether it's cotton, hemp, or whatever, for fiber and other uses, it makes those products better, more superior.
Yeah, you guys are testing on that kind of stuff, it sounds like, on the fiber
Yes,
side?
we sure are.
Wow.
We've got, clients that we're working with now, they're regeneratively producing cotton, and we've got clients that are regeneratively growing hemp. And so, yes, we're beginning to look at, the impact on those end products. And it is a very positive impact. But that's logical, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right. Yeah. It is.
Healthier soil, better product.
So when you talk about regenerative, it sounds very complex, but really it's kind of like simplified farming almost. That's what it feels like to me. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, here's original farming 101 kind of thing.
I'm laughing because I often use the term, it's so old, it's new.
Yes, I think that's what I'm trying to say. It's like it seems completely unfamiliar, but yet it's still it's there in the DNA of what we know.
Yeah, I think so. And once you really truly reconnect with this world around you, you do begin to see far better what you need to do, and that makes all the difference in the world. Now the benefit we have today, so we're doing two things. We are rediscovering the old, okay, and putting that back to work, working with nature. But, today we do have the benefit of all these new technologies and different things. And so we're able to incorporate some of that as well to help us to better understand and understand more quickly. So I think, it's the combination of both of those, the old and the new, that, exactly. And the key thing here is that, no matter what crop we're producing, soil is still soil. Plants are still plants. The microbes are still the microbes. Rain is still rain, and sunlight is still sunlight. It works the same way it's worked for eons.
Today's episode is brought to you by Evan Stone with Clear Rock Farm and Ranch, part of the Clear Rock Realty Group in Lubbock, Texas. Evan understands West Texas land, agriculture, and what it takes to buy and sell farms and ranches in our unique region. If you're ready to make your next move, trust someone who knows the lay of the land. Visit Evan at clearrockrealty.com, serving Lubbock and the surrounding communities. Clear Rock Farms and Ranch, your partner on the plains. I'm taking a certification in sustainable food systems. And one of the things that this is something that we've studied, there is this sense of, they'll have 1 week, we'll listen to someone that's talking about, small farmers, and then someone that's talking about industrial agriculture, and what I have found interesting is that in the process, they are saying what they see happening is one side, especially the people that are promoting on the small farmer side, antagonizing the industrial, the whole, that side of the industry. And they're saying, this is not necessary. This isn't necessary. There are things that each side needs from the other. And I keep saying, we don't have to destroy something completely in order to do something else. It's how do we make good changes? To me, it's like my husband and I are in the energy industry, and we look at, there's a lot of people that, struggle with just how ugly our big wind mills are here that are these wind charger things. And of course, pump jacks are not like the most attractive thing that's ever been on the plains. But, the frustration of what's taking on for our ag lag on the solar and that kind of stuff. And what we see is we're going to need 6 times the amount of energy that we have right now very quickly. And we need energy from every single source that we can possibly get. And you can't turn off an industry like fossil fuels and not, people are going to be hurt by that. But people will die, as we saw when we had no energy in Texas during, that snowstorm Uri. So I've enjoyed this class because I feel like it has given both sides, negatives and positives of both sides, and said, let's see how we can, how can we keep and make better both of these avenues of getting food and fiber to people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So here's the deal. I mean, regenerative is a journey. We don't even know the final destination. Mm-hmm. Gabe will say it, and I say it. We, neither Gabe nor I, even on our own farms or any other farm around the world, have come across what we would call a fully regenerated piece of land.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's all degraded to some extent, right? Through the eons of our activity. And so therefore, there's no one living today that can accurately describe what 100% regeneration looks like.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We just can't.
Yeah.
But here's what we do know. We know what's better. Mm-hmm. Okay. And we know if it's either continuing to improve or if it's not. So we do know that. And a lot of that is measurable. It's quantifiable. Okay.
Yes, right.
And we're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
We are measuring it and quantifying it. So we do know if it's better. And then that led to really the basis of what we do within Regenified, to be honest with you, is, the way that the protocols and standards were developed for Regenified and the tiered system is very much a reflection of the fact that this is a journey. And if we want to get more and more farmers, ranchers, and growers on this journey, we first have to allow them to start. Right. How do you start any journey? You don't, if I'm going to drive from Mississippi to California, I don't, this is not a dream of genie and I blink my eyes and all of a sudden I'm in California, right? I mean, I have to drive the first mile first, then the second mile, and then keep accumulating the miles. And then finally, I end up in California. So this journey is very much the same way. As a farmer, I have to drive that first mile first. And if we don't give them the opportunity to do that and to make some mistakes and to learn as they go, then we're not going to have very many getting on this journey. It's going to become just like the organic sector. We've had 30 plus years, and yet it's still, of the agronomic acres in the U.S., it still amounts to less than 1% of all acres. But that's because you either are or you're not.
Right.
There's no allowance for being anywhere in between. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And that, literally, as a farmer, I can state this, and I've been an organic farmer. Okay. But I can absolutely state this, and a certified organic farmer. I'm still an organic farmer, but I dropped the certification. Okay. But my point is that we work with thousands and thousands of farmers, and I've heard it over and over again that I can't even justify beginning the organic journey. But that's why they like the system that we've developed within Regenified. They can begin, not be condemned, not be put down, right, and all of this, but they can begin and then continuously progress, which is exactly what happens with regenerative. The other thing about organic certification and many other, I'm not just picking on that, most certifications are either you are or you're not. And if you are, there's no differentiation among those, because you can be just sort of barely there and get certified, or you can be really, really good, but you still have the same certification. There's no distinction.
Right. Or you could get certified and not be there at all. Just saying, we've seen it.
Exactly. And we've seen that. But with Regenified, it was designed very specifically to first allow them to just simply begin the journey. Okay. And then to recognize that it takes time on this journey. But regenerative is all about making continuous progress, right? So it's designed so that, you reach tier 1, and then you have so many years to make further improvements, reach tier 2, and then that process repeats itself. And each time you move up a tier, so you have this reward for the additional work that you've done, and you're recognized for that. But at the same time, everybody can start the journey. The other thing that we saw had to happen is it must be scalable. If we're going to really impact enough land and enough consumers, then you've got to make this scalable. That's the only way this can happen. And it's got to be scalable both for the farmer and the grower and the rancher and for all of the businesses, the CPGs and so forth. Right.
That, and that's funny because that's not something I feel like people think about a lot, is how much it's not just the farmer, but it's this whole ecosystem around them that really is impacted by whether they're doing good or not. Lacey is going to be moving towards the certification. We visited about that a few weeks ago, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, was to kind of give us a foundation of what that's going to look like. So she has, she's BCI, and then she's Cotton Trust Protocol, and she is Regen Agri and GAP, which is, I think, her cattle side, though. Now she's going to add this. But to me, when I look at the certifications, what's exciting to me about this is that this is a USDA. This is going to be recognizable in the way that we see like an organic USDA certified organic symbol. Like you guys have done this the farm way. You went like to the powers that be that set and help create these kind of standards and things. And so tell us a little bit about that. And you know also that there's constantly other people trying to create other certifications. But your certification is set apart because of, what would you say?
Well, several things. First, because the company was founded by real farmers who have been there, done that.
Yep.
We've lived it. We've experienced it. And we've taught it to many, many others around the world. So we have decades of experience actually doing this. So it's not a certification based on academics, on theory,
right?
Anything like that. It is a certification based on hardcore reality. Second, again, as I said, it's a certification that allows true scalability. And unfortunately, the vast majority of certifications out there actually work against scalability. So again, our mission and vision, impact as many acres around the world as we can and impact as many people around the world as we can. So how am I doing that when I limit the scalability? The third is it reflects reality.
That's the big difference right there.
Yeah, as we talked about earlier, it's a journey. And we've got to allow for that journey to occur.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things is that this is really such a grassroots. It's like from the bottom up, instead of what we've seen working with organizations that are trying to create some type of certification. I've been in rooms when there's like 2 farmers and 500 other people, and they're trying to decide how they want to create, a certification, and they've never even been out in the field. They don't have a single clue. Now they might know what they think they need, but do they know if it's even realistic for that to be provided to them or not? Or what is that the impact going to be? And it's shocking to me how many of them have never talked to a farmer, or if they do, you talk to them and then you never hear from them again because they want what they want and then they can't figure out why they're not getting anywhere.
Well, so we were all at what was termed the Regenerative Agriculture Summit.
It was regenerative.
Right?
That's right. Yes.
Exactly. And yet farmers, ranchers, and growers were very, very much in the minority.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And the most of us, the majority of us that were there only because we had been invited to sort of serve as the token farmer
right.
on a panel,
That's true.
But not for real input. But yet I see conference after conference that name themselves regenerative agriculture, regenerative this, regenerative that. And there's few to no farmers there. They're not inviting the farmers in. That conference should have been 90% farmers.
Yeah, it makes, and you get there and I will say this, I feel like we go to a lot of these things and part of it is just, we're trying to find those people, and you find those people and bringing those opportunities back home that's our goal. And, and that's, I feel like for us, we made like 4 connections at that regenerative thing. And, part of it is just being salty, like Lacey is super salty. And people would come up to me and say, "Oh, do you work with that little redheaded girl, that redhead girl?" And I was like, "Yes, the one that we're going to be quoting. Yes, that's who I work with, And so the people that you can tell, the people that really, really care and that really do have an intent of doing something different, you can see it when you're in a round table and you can see when they totally do not care what you think. And I try to figure out, why the heck are you here?
Right.
Except who's making the money? This is what happened. Yep. You mentioned hemp a while ago. This is what happened in hemp in Texas. It was the same thing with the emu eggs. It was like, who held the conferences? That's who made the money. The person who sold the tickets to their event made money. For the most part, it was like, that's who's making the money. And that's what I feel like here. And that, to Lacey's point at that meeting was, I feel like I'm the one being farmed at this conference. I'm the commodity here.
That's why I love, of course, I didn't even know her before that conference, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I loved in that session on that first day when she spoke up. And she basically called a spade.
Oh, yeah, she does.
And I was like, wow, this, and the truth is she opened the door for a handful of the rest of us, right? To be able to make some very pertinent comments as well. And so I was super grateful to her for opening that door and for being willing to just stand up, because there were a lot of very powerful people in the room, right? Representing all of these multi-billion-dollar global companies. And she's sort of, as we say, telling them how the cow ate the corn. And it literally changed the session, because the session started off being a moan and groan session about Trump cutting the climate smart dollars. And oh my goodness, what are we going to do to help the farmer and the rancher now?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden she's like, wait a minute, what are you doing to help us right now anyway? What were you doing? What were you going to do with the climate smart dollars to help us?
Yes.
And I was like, oh man, this is so beautiful.
Oh yeah. There was a company there bragging about how much money they'd given to, farmers. And I was like, that wasn't your money you gave. That was our tax dollars. That's right. Don't be taking a big bow for, giving our tax dollars, as incentives, especially when 99% of the time they weren't, anything really great anyway.
Well, and that's the truth. And the honest truth is most of the climate smart projects were never going to move the needle.
Well, meaning you funded more of the same.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was.
It was just adding additional funds to things that we, do, but not in a way that really provided any real incentives. Does that make? Right. And then half the time, if you were already participating in a carbon program, you couldn't participate in a climate smart grant because it had carbon attached to it.
That's correct.
So it kicked out a bunch of people. So it does need to be restructured and I mean, I like to see that kind of money come into agriculture because it's, to me, just part of national security. This should be part of the defense budget. The Army moves on its stomach.
Absolutely,
you know what I'm saying?
it does.
I'm like, to me, agriculture is as important as defense because we all need to eat and we all need to be healthy. And it's just a no-brainer to me, you know. But so we kind of this is my whole thing. I've rabbit trailed everywhere. But so Lacey has she's they cover crop when they can. They're neighbors to Jeremy Brown, and you guys are working with Jeremy already on certification, and they've already got some data that she has apparently the longest running data on the types of her bringing her cattle in along with the cover crops. She has the longest running data, I think, in this area for that kind of information. It's really nice peer reviewed research. But what are you going to be looking at with her?
Well, it'll be a combination of things. Regenified, our verifiers actually measure and quantify more than 65 different data points. And so it's a combination of taking hard measurements, like soil samples are collected to assess soil chemical, physical, and biological, and that's critically important, and biological characteristics. There are biodiversity assessments. There are productivity assessments. They assess the management practices that are being applied and how they're impacting. And most important out of the entire verification is the assessment and scoring based on what we call the 6-3-4, the 6 principles of soil health, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, and the 4 ecosystem processes. How well is the farm or the ranch, conforming to the proper application of the principles and the rules to optimize capture of the 4 ecosystem processes. And then, we also offer and provide, the phytonutrient testing and all of that I mentioned earlier as additional data. So it's an incredibly robust data set. And of course, that data belongs to the farmer and the rancher. It's their data.
So I'm super excited about getting started on this. And one thing I've been thinking about doing is going through the Soil Health Academy, just so that I can have a better basis of knowledge as we are going through this process. And so tell the audience kind of like who's that geared towards, and how do we participate in that?
First of all, they can view upcoming schools at soilhealthacademy.org and see all the schools that will be offered. They are 3-day schools. They're very hands-on, very practical, out in the field. Some classroom, but we like to spend a lot of time out in the field. And, there'll be lots of time to interact and to learn how to implement. They'll get a very solid foundation of, again, the 6 principles and the 3 rules and the 4 ecosystem processes. But they'll be taught how to apply those within their very specific individual farm or ranch context.
Okay.
And see, that's how you're most successful.
Yes.
Yeah. Everything has to be applied within your context. Yeah.
Have you had a Soil Health Academy in our area on this west side of Texas?
Yes, we have. And we've had them in eastern New Mexico and all of that. So we've had academies in the past in that region. We typically have academies, scattered across the U.S. and Canada. But we also do academies and workshops in many other countries throughout the year as well. Yeah.
Well, Ellen, I'm really grateful that you gave us your time today. I know I feel like sometimes there's so much that I want to get out of a person that I follow too many rabbit trails. So we may have to, we will be doing more podcast over the coming months as we work through this certification process with Lacey, and hopefully we will be able to wrangle her to come on. She is very reluctant to come on the podcast, so it's a miracle to get her on. So anyway, but I look forward to learning myself and then maybe, teaching that to other people. I'm just excited about this whole process, and the partnerships that are developing out of coming to some of these meetings that you think are a waste of time. So I'm glad that you were there in Chicago, and I'm glad we were there as well.
Same here. In spite of the fact that we were sort of the tokens there were some very positive meetings, and so I feel deeply rewarded by that. And I'm very much looking forward to continuing this journey with y'all.
Well, friends, I'm looking forward to you all following along on this journey, and be sure to leave us some comments. We're probably did a lot of talking over some folks' heads, and we don't want to bore our farmers either that know way more. So we're trying to keep that balance. But if you've got any questions, let us know, and we are looking forward to more of these episodes and hope that you will join us again on Conservation Stories.